Hey guys, how's your week going? Mine's all right. I am really excited because I had a garden planted and I've really been investing in self-care. So we made a gazebo and we hung this hammock. And then I decided to plant a whole bunch of pollinators with some echinacea and some lavender and some rosemary, some things that I could literally use for my doula business. Anyway, it's just been a really special time where I've been trying to focus as much as I can on creating spaces within my life and even in my surroundings at home that feel safe and comfortable. And so I hope that as you are journeying on in your pregnancy, your postpartum period, your fertility journey, maybe stop today and think about something that you could do where you take something ordinary and make it special or make it spa like. And I'm going to give you another example. So, when my clients are postpartum, I often tell them when they need to take a shower at some point. Maybe it only happens once a week, but you still get a shower. Turn off all the lights in the bathroom and light 4 candles. Bring your little robot or your Alexa in there, play some spa music, and turn something ordinary like a shower into a spa like experience. I even like using their little tablets that you put in the shower and they evaporate. So I have lavender ones and then I have peppermint eucalyptus ones. And I only use the peppermint eucalyptus ones when someone's sick. But the lavender ones, it just makes me feel like I'm at the Grove Park and Spa. So that's how my week is going. I'm enjoying my garden and my gazebo and just resting and taking showers with all the lights off and the candles burning. And so, in the midst of all of this, it's been a busy season for work. And I've done a lot of batch recording. So, I did record this episode in May of 2023, but today's episode is with Alexis Sullivan. And she is a labor and delivery nurse and a nurse practitioner. She was a labor and delivery nurse, now only practices as a nurse practitioner. And she walks me through 3 very different quite incredible birth stories. And also at the very end, we talk about her miscarriage. And there was some uniqueness to the post D&C. And so I wanted to share that with you guys for education. I think that was really important. So let's get to it. What does a contraction feel like? How do I know if I'm in labor? And what does a day of labor look like? Wait, is this normal? Hey, I'm Heidi. My best friends call me Heids. I'm a certified birth doula, host of this podcast, and author of Birth Story, an interactive pregnancy guidebook. I have supported hundreds of women through their labor and deliveries, and I believe every one of them and you deserves a microphone and a stage. So here we are. Listen each week to get answers to these tough questions. Birth Story, where we talk about pregnancy, labor, deliveries, where we tell our stories and share our feelings. And of course, chat about our favorite baby products and motherhood. And because I'm passionate about birth outcomes, you will hear from some of the top experts in labor and delivery. Whether you are pregnant, trying desperately to get pregnant, or you just love a good birth story, I hope you will stick around and be part of this birth story family. So let's say you're pregnant. That's why you're listening to the Birth Story podcast, and you're preparing for a hospital birth that's upcoming. And of course, this podcast gives you tons of free information, right? But do you really understand the stages of labor? How to know when you're in labor? What if you have to have an induction? What about a cesarean section? What about all of the decisions that you have to make once you get to the hospital? So you get there and then they put you in triage. Birth Story Academy walks you through all the things that happen, like that rapid fire with monitoring and blood work and questions and IV ports. And do you want an epidural? I don't know. Do you? In Birth Story Academy, we literally break down all of those decisions, pros, cons, risks, benefits, intuition. And like we get into it. We make birth plans, we do birth visions, we listen to birth affirmations and parenting affirmations. And like at the end of it, like you know exactly what's going to happen when you go into labor and when you get to the hospital. What's going to happen after you give birth, newborn care preferences, how to take care of your baby. I guess what I'm getting at is if you're not in Birth Story Academy, what's your plan? I want you to come join me in Birth Story Academy and let me walk you through all of the decisions that you have to make if you're having a hospital birth and how to have body autonomy and how to have informed consent and informed refusal. I'm going to teach you and your partner, if you have one, everything that you need to know about birthing in a hospital so that you can walk in that door with some swagger, with some confidence, wash that anxiety away because you learned everything you needed to learn in Birth Story Academy and you are ready to crush that birth. Okay, let's do it. And let's get to this episode. Hey, Alexis, welcome to the Birth Story podcast.
Hi, Heidi. Glad to be here.
I am so glad that you are here too. It's really nice to always have a perspective of someone who's in the medical field. So Alexis is a nurse practitioner and you guys, she did work in labor and delivery too. So I may ask you some medical things that I don't typically cover on the podcast. I'm excited.
I'm excited too.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can answer them.
Well, Alexis, I know that you are brand new mom again. So can you tell everybody about your kids and their ages as we're recording?
Yes. So I am married to my husband, Eric. I'm 29 and we have 3 boys. I have a 5-year-old named Leo, a soon to be 3-year-old named Bowen, and our newest is 5 weeks old at the time of the recording, and his name is Gunner.
I love your names. That's good naming right there.
Yeah, we
So,
tried to pick strong names, if they're being announced on the sports field or something.
yes.
That's how my husband goes through names. So,
That's how I ended up with one named Maximus Danger.
yes.
Short for Max Danger. I mean, can't really forget their name. And then Jagger is my youngest. So I think I tried really hard too with those
Yeah.
strong names. One of my favorite midwives here, Sadie, her son is Gunner. I love it.
Yeah.
So what a good name. All right. Well, we're going to dig into these 3 birth stories. Trigger warning, you guys. In between, Alexis had a miscarriage and there was some unique things about her miscarriage that I think we could all learn from today. So we're going to dig into that a little bit before we move to the 3rd birth story. So let's start with your very first birth story with 5-year-old Leo. And just, you would have been around 24 years old or 23 when you found out that you were pregnant. So was it a planned pregnancy? Did it surprise you? Was it fertility? Like, what was that journey like?
So my husband and I had been married in 2015. We got married, and I had been telling him from the get-go, like, whenever you're ready, I'll be ready for kids. And I finally kept pushing the issue a little bit. And in 2017, we decided to try. And I kind of said, hey, trying will be fun. It took my mom a while to get pregnant. So, it could take me a while too. So that's, he thought it was going to be, at least some months of trying, but we were very blessed and got pregnant on the first try with him. So in April of 2017, we found out we were pregnant.
Wow. So your mom had a long fertility journey and then you got pregnant right away?
Yes.
Yeah, that was probably pretty surprising, right?
Yeah.
The doula clients that I work with, I promise you that there are very similar reactions to processing pregnancy when we get pregnant right away. And then when we have really long fertility journeys, like they can be just put you off, like where you're like, what's happening here,
Yeah, we have a really strong history of endometriosis in the family, and even like my cousins and other women in my family, it took them a while to get pregnant. So I just assumed that was going to be my story as well. But we were very blessed with the first try there.
Is that a diagnosis that you have, Alexis?
I do not have that diagnosis, no.
Okay. All right. Well, that could be a key differentiator
Yes.
there. All right. So, how did you know that you were in labor with Leo? So, when it's at the time, were you a labor and delivery nurse also?
I was. So I began working as a labor and delivery nurse, I think in 2016, September, October, if I remember correctly. And, I picked my doctor who I wanted to be my doctor based on who all the other people saw. And then this doctor, he's just wonderful. He had been a physician for a while and had great bedside manner. He'd come up, he'd give you hugs and kiss you on the forehead during your appointments, and just the best doctor to be with. And so when I got toward the end of the pregnancy, he offered, do you want to be induced? Do you want to go into labor? And I honestly kind of wanted to pick who I wanted to be my nurse while I was laboring. Because when you work there, you know who you do and don't want to be your nurses.
Yeah.
And so I elected to be induced because I had a feeling that he was going to be a big baby. And while I know that that's not, an issue or a reason to be induced, I was told when I was checked at like 36 through 39 weeks, oh, you're at zero station already. He's right there. He's really low. And I kept, pointing to my stomach and saying, then why is he all the way up here, in my ribs? So it was an elective induction,
Okay. An elective induction at what gestation?
39 weeks and 6 days. So just one day before my due date.
39 and 6. Okay. That's something really important for the audience to hear. When someone says we're going to schedule you at a 39-week induction, that could be 39 and 0, 39 and 1, 39 all the way to 39 and 6. It just means sometime in the 39th week. A lot of people think it means like 39 and 0 days, but it's just sometime in the 39th week. So yours was still a 39-week induction because you hadn't crossed over into that 40 weeks yet. I'm so glad that you made the distinction though of recognizing as the pregnant person that you know your body and you're like, okay, how can this baby be at a zero station and then be all the way up in my ribs? Like probably a big baby, probably a long baby. But I'll just pause right there. Zero station. You guys learn about all of this in Birth Story Academy if you want to jump in, but it's compared to the ischial spines. And so a zero station is completely in line with the base of the ischial spine. Am I saying that correct, Alexis, the labor and
Yes.
delivery nurse? I was like the expert. So, when the baby's floating around in their sac high up, they could be a -4 station, -3, -2, -1, 0. And then when we get those positive numbers are when we're kind of like moving the head beyond those ischial spines. So zero station is very low.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Were you starting to efface and dilate some
um,
also?
So I was 1 centimeter and 80 to 90% effaced. So I was not very dilated, but I was very thinned out with his pregnancy.
Yes. The longest and hardest, most arduous parts of labor, in my opinion, watching this as a doula, is watching my clients efface.
Oh, yes, especially for a first time. Now, like with second pregnancies and third, from what I've seen and talked to doctors about, there's definitely like multips, second time or more moms, they will dilate and still keep that thicker cervix, which usually doesn't happen as much for a first time moms. So, and they tend to thin out faster. So,
Yeah. I will say, like, let's say we have a first time person just like you going in for an induction at 39 and 6. Like, very rarely will I see an 80 to 90%
yeah,
effacement.
yeah, that's what everyone was so surprised how thinned out I was with his. And I didn't do anything special. I didn't eat the dates, or I did drink some red raspberry leaf tea. And I was trying to hand express some colostrum. So I will say I did that with him. I think just that last 38th week and 39th week.
AROM, which can cause some uterine activity.
Which did nothing,
It did
in my
nothing. Okay. I was like,
opinion. Yeah.
sometimes that nipple stimulation can cause them. But I
No.
think just the size of your baby at a low station, putting
Yes, I think that's what helped.
yeah, just constant pressure on the cervix, like sends a signal, releases
Mhm.
prostaglandins, and the cervix starts to thin. Now, I don't know your story, Alexis.
Yeah.
Okay. But when you guys are listening, if you get a vaginal exam, I like you to ask for SPED. Station of the baby, 0. Position of the baby, head down, or LOA or LOT or ROA or ROP. Like, you guys can Google it, right? It's all the different positions, ways in which the baby's head could be. And then we like to look at effacement, which you were 80 to 90% effaced. And then D on SPED is dilation, 1 centimeter dilated. All of those numbers go into a Bishop score. They also look at how soft, if you're 80 to 90% effaced, you're just as thin and soft as you can get. But that tells me, Alexis, even though I don't know your story, that we're probably going to have a successful vaginal birth, and it's going to be less than 12 hours. So,
Both of those are correct.
okay. So, you guys, we can't put any single person into a box, right? Like, Alexis could have said, like, oh, the baby was OP and I labored for a really long time. And, but when you have a very high Bishop score going into an induction, it's probably going to go quickly, and it's probably going to be a successful vaginal birth. So let's dig into it. So you checked in for your induction, and
Yes.
what? Oh, sorry.
So when you mentioned the Bishop score too, so the doctors are required to fill that out for elective inductions to know how to induce. So my doctor had my paper, and I was like, let me look at what you're circling on there, because I really did not want to get Cervidil to go in the night before, because that's what the hospital that I worked at the time did.
Okay.
And I saw how uncomfortable sometimes that was for women, and mostly just the monitoring and the lack of sleep. And I didn't want to go into labor exhausted and have to be on the monitors all night long. So I was like, let's circle that I'm a little more effaced here, or let's circle that I'm a little more dilated, to make my Bishop score a little bit better, to justify that we were just doing Pitocin, because I really did not want that Cervidil. So
Okay.
I went in for a Pitocin only induction.
Pitocin only induction. Okay. So that's very interesting to me, because I'm surprised that they skipped the Cook catheter with you. So being so thin, but only 1 centimeter, like they could have done a balloon catheter.
So the hospital I was at the time, that was not very common. I think when I worked there, I only saw one being put in, honestly. They
Oh,
either did Cervidil or they would do Pitocin. And occasionally they would do like the Cook catheters after a failed Cervidil, or like Cervidil, softened and opened a little bit. So then they were able to do the Cook catheter. But that was not a very popular method when I worked there.
that's so interesting. Different
Yeah.
parts of, so, and we didn't cover this, Alexis. So you're in Lexington, Kentucky.
Yes, right
Yeah.
now. At the time, I lived up in Findlay, Ohio.
Oh, in Findlay, Ohio. Okay. So look at how different things can be, because we haven't even gotten to your fourth pregnancy story, which
Yes.
just occurred. And in that one, like, you were in Lexington giving birth. So we'll even be able to see
Yes.
some of the differences there.
Oh,
But
yeah.
in Findlay, Ohio. So I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I would say we use a ton of Cook catheters.
Yeah.
But because of that, we have a lower, I would say, AROM rate, artificial rupture of the membranes. So they tend to really help the cervix thin, efface, dilate, open to 3 to 6 centimeters with a Cook catheter, then start Pitocin. And we tend to see waters rupture on their own quite often. Did you guys have a higher AROM rate up in
I
Ohio?
think I think we did. I think it was very common practice for them to artificially rupture, um, and then to get the process kind of
Kind
going
of going,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
So I know you wanted a specific nurse, which is so cool because most people are like, I know which doctor I want, or I know which
Yes.
midwife I want. So the fact that you were like, oh, I know which nurse I want. So did that happen? Was like the nurse that you wanted
Well, so
there
I just looked at the schedule and I picked the best option for the day.
for the day? Okay. I love
Yes.
it. Insider information right there. And so what time was arrival?
So it was our shifts there were 5 to 5, so it was a 6 a.m. induction.
Okay, 6 a.m. induction. After a good night's sleep, did you get a good night's sleep?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I got like 4 to 5 hours that night.
It's so
Better than nothing.
hard. Yeah, I mean, we're restless because we're anxious and we're excited, but then also we're still like uncomfortable and peeing. But if you had
Yeah.
4 to 5 hours, that's great. Now, as a labor and delivery nurse at the time, were you like, and you've seen it all, were you like, get me that epidural like as soon as I'm in pain, or were you like, I'm gonna go all natural? Like, did you have a plan for pain
The
management?
plan was to go all natural, but
Okay.
I did not do any courses or anything like that on
Okay.
pain management. So I ended up with the epidural,
Yeah.
and I was very blessed to to have a great epidural and a great experience with it. So,
You know what, Alexis? I'm a doula and I do a lot of natural birth for a living, and I still got an epidural at 2 centimeters dilated. I really I want to simmer on that point right there where Alexis said, I didn't do anything to prepare. Okay. That's okay. Our body has innate divine wisdom, right? I'm quite certain that there are many parts of this world where women are having unmedicated natural childbirths without any preparation at all, right? It's hard when there's like fentanyl sitting right next to you and nitrous
yeah.
oxide and, all these things that can just like make it go away. The number one thing that I would say from my own experience getting an epidural at 2 centimeters dilated and watching other people's is it just being a choice, right? Like
Yes.
you can just keep choosing on every contraction to just keep going, or you can choose to get an epidural and take a long, good nap.
Yes.
So Alexis, we were very similar on our first babies of getting that epidural. And you use the word blessed. Yes. When an epidural goes well, it can be a wonderful gift that we have the benefit of having in the United States, right? Like not everyone has an epidural available to them for medical care, and we do. So you check in, they start Pitocin because that was your
They
plan.
started Pitocin at 7 a.m.
Okay.
And then, I mean, I was like, walk. My nurse was letting me walk the halls a little bit. I did, they were just extended bathroom breaks
Okay.
that I was taking off the monitor, and I would kind of walk the hall a little bit. And at 7:30 or 9:30, my doctor came around, and I think I was like almost 2 centimeters, but I was very posterior. I had a very posterior cervix when we started, and I was more mid position. So that was
Okay.
about the only thing the Pitocin did on its own, was kind of move my cervix forward a little bit. And while he was checking me, I said, just go ahead and break my water. Like, I'm here. We're having a baby. Just go ahead. And he said, all right, there's no turning back now. So we
Yeah.
broke my water around 9 a.m.
Okay. I was gonna say, I was like, AROM usually comes into the
Yeah.
story at some point unless it breaks on its own. So by 9:30 a.m., you're on Pitocin, your water is ruptured. That baby is well applied to
Oh,
your
yes.
cervix, and there's nowhere to go except at this point with a mid-position cervix besides starting to dilate and have consistent timeable contractions. When did they start to feel uncomfortable?
Oh, right after they broke my
Okay.
water. And I never got above 6 milliunits of Pitocin with,
Wow.
so yeah, they started at 2, went 2, 4, 6, and I had contractions 2 to 3 minutes apart. So we never went above 6.
Wow. Now, in my hospital, they kind of cap it at 20 unless there's a very unique circumstance
Yeah.
with like a internal uterine pressure catheter and a fetal scalpel electrode. Then I have seen them go like to 28 or 30, but
Hmm.
usually 20 is kind of the max. So 6, that's
Is
a
very
very
low.
low. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, that's very low. Meaning like your body was ready, you know?
Well, yeah.
Um,
And to fast forward, 6 is the magical number of Pitocin with my last as well. So I think my body just
oh.
really hit 6 of Pitocin, and it just knows what to do.
And
So,
it knows what to do. And so then you were in what we would call an active labor pattern, 2 to 3 minutes apart, lasting 60 to 90 seconds,
mhm.
and you're feeling uncomfortable.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding. That's when we start to have cervical change. So,
Yes.
at what point were you like, "Hey, can I have an epidural?"
So I made it to, I think, 3 to 3.5 centimeters
Okay.
around, I want to say it was around noon. So about
Okay.
2.5 hours, I think, after my water broke.
Okay. Well, you made it further than
Um,
me, Alexis.
yeah. So they checked me after they did the epidural, and the policy there was like everyone has to step out of the room. I sent my husband to go get lunch, and I was like, "Go eat. I'm gonna get this epidural." He came back. I was comfortable. He had eaten. Um, they put the catheter in, and I was 4. So before they had checked me, I was 3, and then I was 4 centimeters after the epidural. And then I just asked for the peanut ball and
Mhm.
decided, that I was just gonna labor there for a little bit and see what happened.
Now, you have the advantage of knowing labor positions with an epidural because you were a labor and delivery nurse. But the nurse that you had chosen, did she kind of help you navigate those position changes too, or were you running the show?
So we really only just did like just sitting up high and then each side with the peanut ball.
Okay.
We didn't really do any different positions other than that. To be honest, I didn't really need them. I dilated rather quickly, so
Okay. so, so
and
once,
I didn't want to bother. I was like, I'll let you know, I'll let you know if I need you. But I knew the nurse was kind of just relaxed and was going to be kind of hands off. So
good. So once you got the epidural and you were fully relaxed, AKA your pelvic floor was fully relaxed and released. How long was it until you started to feel like rectal pressure?
I did get a lot of pain on one side, which we called like a hot spot at that, with your epidural. I had like a hot spot, and the nurse anesthetist came back in and he was like, check her. And my nurse was like, You just placed this an hour ago. I'm not checking her. Because she's in pain. So you're gonna make her comfortable, whether she's 10 centimeters or she's still 4. So
Yeah.
um, she's like, she needs to be comfortable. So he dosed me up with the epidural a little bit, and then my blood pressure did drop when they dosed me a little higher with that. So I did have to get the ephedrine to bring my blood pressure back up. So then I wasn't checked again. So like I said, shift change was 5 to 5. So I told my nurse, I was like, why don't we check me around like 4:30, and because we'll see what I'm doing before shift change. And at 4:30 I was complete.
Wow. And it's
Yeah,
possible that you had been complete long before
for a
that,
while. Yeah,
but you kind of had a heavy epidural at that point.
I did. I had a
Okay.
very heavy epidural.
You know what?
I continued to have a heavy epidural the entire time. So
So, Alexis, with that heavy epidural, it makes total sense to me that you didn't feel that rectal pressure then. And the fetal ejection reflex is real. So, if Leo was wanting to be born, you would have started pushing. So, you were just laboring down, probably, you know?
yes. So because I did not want a shift change baby, I didn't want to do that to my coworkers. I said, okay, I'll just labor down then until after shift change, and then we'll start pushing. Since it was about 4:30, so around I think about 5:15 after shift change occurred, is when it's between 5:15 and 5:30 is when I started pushing with him.
Okay. So, it was all coached pushing because you didn't ever feel that rectal pressure to
Yeah,
guide it.
so I guess that's a little bit of a lie because I had all the nurses cracking up because I kept asking who was sticking their finger in my butt while I was pushing. So I did feel I felt something, but I didn't to me it wasn't like the pressure that I was expecting to
Okay.
feel.
And everyone feels that differently with an epidural, right? It's overwhelming without an
Yes.
epidural. And with an epidural, just depending on your varying levels, I mean, it can be. Listen, you guys have never seen my birth video with Max, my first. And the reason is because all I'm saying the whole time is, oh my God, my butt, my butt, my butt. I was like, my butt. And that's like
Yeah, I
my,
kept asking about my butt, like, I thought someone was sticking their finger there, and I was like, "Who has their finger in my butt?" My husband's like, "No one, no one," but all the nurses were cracking up.
and it's like a sensation I had never felt before. So I just kept talking about it because it made me feel better. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
and now I can never play my birth video for anyone, including my
Yes.
children, you know? So how long did you push for? So, well, let's
Um,
say this. What station were you at when you started to push?
to be honest, I don't remember, maybe
Yeah.
+1. I don't think he moved down too much,
Okay.
but he was born at 6:17, so I pushed for less than an hour.
Wow. This is a very fast story for a first time person giving birth, getting in an induction. Like, this is incredible.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I was expecting it to be, a day-long induction, and, so I had prepared my husband and my family for the long haul. I was like, "Don't check in on us. I don't wanna be bothered. This could take a while." And then we sent our family pictures, and they're like, "What happened?"
I know. And at 6:17, I would be like, and now someone can bring me sushi for dinner. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, I think I
So,
got pizza, but
yes. But I mean, like, I was like, time for dinner and a good night's
exactly,
sleep.
yeah.
I mean, what a beautiful birth story. How much did he weigh?
He was 9 pounds, 4 ounces and 22
Girlfriend.
22 inches long, so that was why he was still up in my ribs when he was at 0 station.
That's a big baby for term.
Yes.
Did they have to do blood sugars?
With him, they did 12 hours of
12
blood
hours.
sugars,
Okay.
and, because he was big, I did get, a shot of methergine in
Okay.
addition to Pitocin after him. It was just right after the placenta came out. I had a little bit heavier bleeding. My doctor said it was just a big baby, big placenta. That was probably the reason why. So
Yeah, and that makes sense. Methergine is a medication that causes the uterus to clamp down.
yeah,
Okay.
it's one of the medications that they'll use in the event of hemorrhage or heavier bleeding. So
Yeah. I
they don't give it if you have high blood pressure. If you have preeclampsia, so it does raise your blood pressure.
Okay, and then there's one of them that you can't give if you have asthma, because you mentioned
Um,
that when we were talking earlier before the show started, you mentioned you had, like, pregnancy-induced asthma. So
So
I
with my third, yeah, I've developed some weird breathing issues. It's either like an asthma or an allergy type thing that was causing some type of bronchoconstriction.
okay.
But I believe it's hemabate that they don't give with asthma. But
Okay.
like I said, it's been a while since I've worked labor and delivery, so don't quote me on that
Nope.
one.
I'm gonna quote you on it because I know exactly that that is actually what it is.
Yeah.
So if you have asthma, you need to make sure that your provider knows all of your history, but they wouldn't use hemabate if you have any bronchoconstrictions. But methergine, Pitocin, TXA, these are all medications that are commonly used. Cytotec rectally,
Yeah.
those are medications that are used routinely to reduce bleeding after the placenta has delivered. So, seems pretty routine. Did you have any
Yeah.
complications post birth?
No, I had bilateral labial tearing with
Okay.
him, which was pretty uncomfortable because it's all internal stitching.
Yeah.
So that recovery and even kind of into both pregnancies, when I have like hormonal fluctuations, I can kind of feel the scarring, like feel that still.
Yeah.
Um, it's not super painful, and it's just kind of on like the first day of my cycle when it comes like the change in hormones. You can feel, I can just tell where I tore, but no lingering complications with how big he was or anything like that.
Gotcha. Well, I know that you're a nurse practitioner, but I do have some clients that have had some similar experiences and they ended, now that you're not pregnant. I mean, I know you are breastfeeding, but at some point they ended up using internal estrogen cream.
Yeah, that's what my current OB has suggested for when I'm done nursing and being
Mhm.
pregnant. She's like, "Well, when the time comes that you're not pregnant or nursing, we can give you some estrogen cream to help with that." So,
Yeah, good. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that for people listening that are like,
yes, yeah,
wait,
because
it
I honestly
is.
I didn't even know that that could be done. I was like, what is going on? Hopefully there's something they can do. I didn't know if I was going to have to do that or, addition pelvic floor therapy, which I'm sure can still be an option, but
Yeah, you have to find a pelvic floor therapist that's comfortable with internal
internal.
pelvic work and that will
Mhm.
do scar mobilization therapy. So,
Yeah.
for you, Alexis, for anyone else that's listening, make sure you ask those types of questions. Not all pelvic floor therapists do internal pelvic floor
Yes.
therapy. So that's super important. Did you do anything with your placenta?
I did not. The hospital saves it for a week. If you or the baby were to develop a fever, then it would get sent to pathology. And then after that, they just discard of it. So
Okay.
to me, that was important. If one of us were to be sick, I wanted the placenta to be available to be tested. Working in healthcare, that's just, that was important to me. So that's what I did with all three births. I just had them keep it for the week and then discard of it afterward.
Again, I'm just so, like, everything's just done so differently, right? So,
Yeah.
there's one hospital here that in my area that will hold for 24 hours in case of a fever, but most every single placenta just goes straight to pathology. They
Yeah.
just send it to pathology. They will give you a bill for pathology, and then I would say we do a lot of placenta encapsulation and placenta donation. So
Yeah.
in North Carolina, they partner with Duke and Chapel Hill and some just like the big universities,
Yeah.
and they're doing research, but they also are making skin grafts for burn victims, which is really cool.
That's really neat.
So donation's also an option. That's why I like to ask at the end of your birth stories because, now you're breastfeeding Gunner right now as we're chatting. So did you
Yes.
go on a breastfeeding journey with Leo?
I did. He nursed all three of my boys are tongue tied, which can be hereditary too. So Leo was tongue tied, got his clipped after the hospital. And then because he had a little bit of issue gaining weight, getting back up to birth weight. So once he got that taken care of, breastfeeding was fairly easy for us. And he nursed until he was 22 months old. So until I found out I was pregnant with Bowen is when Leo he weaned himself.
All right. Well, let me ask you about that. So I'm assuming if you were still breastfeeding, how were you trying to get pregnant or like, because ovulation can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you're
Yes.
breastfeeding. So what did that look like?
So we were trying. We tried for about 10 months. I did not want to go to the doctor for help because I figured they would tell me that I needed to quit nursing to, be fully diagnosed if there was any infertility issues or for additional testing. I was doing the ovulation strips though. I was ovulating. I was doing basal body temperature and ovulation strips, and I was ovulating. I just wasn't getting pregnant. And at the 10th month, we decided because I was in school to become a nurse practitioner at the time, I
Okay.
said this would not be an ideal month to get pregnant. We should not try this month. And I did get pregnant that month. So,
Look, sounds like you ovulated a little bit earlier, a little bit
yes.
late.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Good for you though, Alexis. Do you know how hard it is, you guys? We just want to encourage you. Like, you have a job, you have a baby, like then you go back to grad school to become a nurse practitioner. I mean, like, bravo. This is a very difficult time in our lives to be for us as mothers to be fully human and
Yes.
to mother our children too. So,
And I'm sure the stress of grad school wasn't helping the issue of not getting pregnant either. Or the stress of trying because, honestly, that people put a lot of I was kind of expecting it to be like the first time where, oh, we try one time and I get pregnant again. So, I think, just the journey in itself was probably not helping the
yeah.
situation either.
I'm assuming though at some point, like let's say you didn't get pregnant at that month, like you were still connected to breastfeeding, right? So for those people listening, like, that is always at some point you have to balance. If you continue to not get pregnant, you can balance letting go of breastfeeding and seeing if there is an underlying fertility
Yeah,
issue.
my plan all along was to wean at 2. I have always
Yeah.
said that's the longest I will nurse my kids is 2. Just personally, that's the limit I set. I get really touched out after even a year, and they don't even nurse, that frequently after that. But I'd continue to do it for the benefits. So I had decided that if we still hadn't gotten pregnant, I was going to wean him at 2, and then I would go back to my doctor.
Yeah. Some people even tandem nurse. Like some people are able to go through a pregnancy, nursing, get pregnant again, deliver, and then nurse both babies. So,
Yeah.
um, now when you got pregnant, did your milk kind of just dry up right away?
I think so because he tried to nurse and then he just looked at me and hopped down off the chair and said, "Nope," and walked away. So I think it quickly either changed over to colostrum or there just wasn't much there.
Okay. Our bodies are
Something he didn't like
so
about it.
yeah, our bodies are so smart and our babies are so smart, right? He's like,
Yes.
"Nope, there's something in the refrigerator that's better for me."
Yes.
Today. So tell me how your pregnancy went with number 2 with Bowen.
Um, so it went pretty well. I was much sicker. I was very sick. I lost about 10 pounds in the first trimester. And other than that, it went smoothly after the second trimester until I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes and COVID hit at the same time. So
And
he's my COVID baby.
so did you have COVID?
No, no, I just meant COVID hit in the world is he was born in June of 2020.
June of
So
2020. Okay, so I would say all of your pregnancy was during COVID, but maybe the world just didn't
we
know
just didn't know.
yet. Yes,
Yeah,
the
we just
world
didn't know
didn't
it
know
yet.
yet. Very interesting that you did not have gestational diabetes on 1 and you did have gestational diabetes on 2. Do you have any insight for the listeners from your practice as a labor and delivery nurse or a nurse practitioner as to why someone may develop gestational diabetes with one pregnancy and not with another?
So I know you're more after you get it the first time, you are more likely to have it in subsequent pregnancies. The thought was maybe I developed it later with my first pregnancy, and that could be a reason he was big. Was that maybe I did have it undiagnosed, and that's why he ended up being a large baby and at 39 and 6. But honestly, I think it was just, it's how your placenta is, and maybe just that time around, my placenta just, I always say my placenta didn't like me, is how I worded it, because I hated having to poke myself 4 times a day. But
Yeah.
thankfully, I was just diet and exercise controlled. So if I hopped on my treadmill and walked, my sugars were perfect. So
It's like we should all do that all the time.
yeah, I walked 3 to 4 miles a day for the second half of my pregnancy. So,
Wow, good for you,
yeah,
Alexis. It's not easy to do. So
it was not.
did anything change for you with that diagnosis? Like, were you planning to get induced in the 39th week again because that's what you did with your first and that was a great experience? Or was it like we should induce you at 39 weeks because of gestational diabetes? What did that conversation look
Um,
like?
so with how big Leo was and being gestational diabetic, I had discussed with my provider that we would get induced at 39 weeks. In the 39th week, and my plan was to get an epidural and then have them break my water and go along with an induction since my first went so smoothly. However, they did not have any openings for an induction when I was 39 weeks exactly. So I was scheduled for 39 and 1. And my wild middle child decided to come on his own at 39 weeks exactly. So,
Wow. So you went into spontaneous labor a day
yes, I
before
did.
your scheduled induction. Okay.
Yes.
Y'all, listen, I'm a doula. My clients have plans. Okay. We even if they have a scheduled C-section, we have plans for that spontaneous labor. Did you have a plan? Were you like, okay, if my water breaks, if my contractions start, or were you in denial? Like, nope, I'm going to make it to 39.
So, I had been getting checked at my visits, and At my 38th week visit, I was 3 to 4 centimeters and 70% effaced. And with how quickly I went from 4 to complete the last time, the doctors and the midwife at that office had told me, if you have any contractions for more than an hour, you go to the hospital. They didn't say wait the 5 minutes. I was not allowed to do that. I was to head straight
No,
in.
100%. Because when you're 3 to 4 centimeters dilated and 70% effaced, and you're a multip, and you have a history of a very fast labor, the chances of you having a labor longer than 4 hours are small. So I don't know your story, but I'm going to guess you had labor less than 4 hours, but I don't know. So what did you
So
do when you started having contractions?
So I woke up that morning, walked on the treadmill, and then went to the restroom and I had bloody show.
Okay.
And I also had decreased fetal movement that morning. So I text my doctor personally and let him know. And he said, call the office, we'll see you, and we'll do a non-stress test and we'll check your cervix because I was having irregular contractions. They felt like Braxton Hicks to me, is what I told him. I said, they're coming anywhere between 8 to 15 minutes apart and they do not hurt at all.
Okay.
Um, so I went about my morning. I called the office. I told my husband to come home around noon. I said, we'll eat lunch and we'll go to the doctor's office at 2:15 is when they scheduled my appointment.
Okay.
And my husband, I was having these irregular contractions, didn't hurt. He started driving home for work, and I had 3 contractions that were about 8 minutes apart that were painful. And then after those 3, I had 3 that were 5 minutes apart, and I looked at him. He pulled in the driveway. I said, "We're going to the hospital now." He said, "I thought we were going to the doctor's office." I said, "Nope, we're going to the hospital."
Good for
And on the
you.
drive, they started 2 to 3 minutes apart, and I had an hour drive to the hospital.
No, you didn't.
Yes.
Where where in the
So
middle of nowhere, Ohio is this?
So we moved to Lima, Ohio, but I was still delivering in Findlay, Ohio. So it was just
Okay.
straight up Interstate 75, but there's construction along the way. So I was just praying there was no road work that day
And it's the middle
because
of the
it's
afternoon, so rush hour is probably,
yes,
like, coming into play. Oh my god. So you had to drive an hour, and at this point, you're 2 to 3 minutes apart.
the entire drive, 2 to 3 minutes apart.
Wow.
I text my doctor, said skipping the appointment, heading to the hospital. And he said, "Okay, they'll call me when you get there."
Okay.
And
Were
so I
you
had
freaking
worked there.
out?
I wasn't freaking out. My husband kept asking me how I was doing, and I said, "Stop talking, just drive." Because I like to joke that my husband drives like a grandpa and does
Okay.
not drive quickly for anything. And I was like, if he drives like he normally does, we're going to have a baby on the side of the interstate right now. So we made it there. I walked up to the labor and delivery. Everyone's talking to me because in the meantime, I had stopped working to focus more on my schoolwork.
Okay.
So I had stopped working up in labor and delivery. So everyone wanted to talk and chat and see how I was doing. And I was like, can we just get me in a room? And they're like, yeah, yeah, here, go pee in the cup, put the gown on. We'll be back. And I was like, okay. And after no one came back after like 15 minutes, so I'll say we got to the hospital. I looked, it was 1:18. I had written it down somewhere. So we got there at 1:18. And then after I was finally registered and the nurse came back and they checked me around 1:45 and I was 7 centimeters.
And were you like, "Where's my epidural?"
They said, well, how are you doing? I said, it's not too bad because my water hadn't broken.
Okay.
So I said, I'm fine for now if you want to draw my blood and get my IV in. um, so at I believe at like 2:15, I told him there was more pressure. I was like, "Up, there's some pressure." And I was 8 centimeters, 8 to 9. And she was calling my doctor like, "Where are you?" The nurse was calling her from her personal phone too,
Yep.
from my room like, "So she doesn't have an epidural. You need to get here." He's like, "I'm on my way. I'm on my way." So I think he showed up around 2:30 and had a lipocervix. So I labored with that lipocervix for almost 30 minutes. And finally, I looked at my doctor. I said, we've pushed past this with other people. We're pushing past it.
Good for you. So a lip is where all of the cervix is dissolved except for a small portion of it, you guys. So if you're looking at a clock, think 12 to 3, there's a little bit of cervix, but 3 to 12, there's no cervix at all. And so when Alexis says push past, she literally means either she pushes past it or the OB or midwife holds the cervix back while she pushes.
Which is what he did. I did the standard, I'm gonna hold my breath, push to 10 3 times, and he reduced the cervical lip while I was pushing, which I do not recommend without an epidural. It is not comfortable at all.
Mhm.
So I think I started pushing just a little bit before 3 o'clock, and Bowen was born at 3:11.
What? Like they reduced the lip and had a baby within 11 minutes.
Yes.
Goodness. And really your
So my
first
my first
contractions.
contraction was probably 12, 15. The one I'd really say hurt was probably 12, 15ish.
Yeah. Wow. See how good I am at my job? I
Mm.
said less than 4 hours.
Yes, yep.
It's so crazy. I mean, there are patterns like you guys. Every single person is so different, but there are patterns that we see that could indicate that you're have a higher likelihood of having a story like Alexis's. If your cervical exam at 38 weeks is like that, you've already given birth, that kind of thing. Okay, so this was at 39 and 0, so 6 days of
Yes.
less growing than Leo. So how much did Bowen weigh?
He was 8'11".
Okay, so right on track with what he would have been because
It,
Leo was
yeah.
9'4", right? So,
Mhm.
okay, so you know about what size babies you make. That tells me that you probably did have gestational diabetes too with the first one. Do you think
Yeah.
you did? Late onset?
Honestly, I don't think I did.
No?
Because
Okay.
I was having issues where my sugar would like drop.
Okay.
Like I would feel lightheaded, shaky until I would eat. So I think I had kind of the opposite issue.
Okay.
Um, but it wasn't all the time, so I don't know.
I only asked it's because my babies were 10, 6, and then when I induced early, 9 pounds. I never tested positive for gestational diabetes,
Yeah,
but
and I'll tell you more on this, the third one. Like I even willingly took the 3-hour gestational diabetes test,
yeah.
and I passed.
Wow.
And he
Yeah.
came out
Okay,
big.
we'll get to
So
it. Okay, so before we get to Gunner's story, okay. Well, first of all, tell me about your tearing. Did you have those
did
labia tears or no?
I had a slight he said I needed 1 stitch.
Okay.
And so he started getting the needle. I said, "Wait, wait, wait, where's the lidocaine?" He said, "Well, either I poke you with the stitch or I poke you with the lidocaine." And I was like, "Oh, well, true."
So true.
Um, and I mean, honestly, it didn't hurt. I think like feeling the ring of fire and everything, like with him, my pain tolerance was just, much higher.
Yes. Okay.
And my water did not break until I was pushing. So I handed my phone off to people to take pictures of his birth because I was hoping he would be born in the sac. And
Oh.
unfortunately, as his head came out, he ruptured his sac. So
You know what, Alexis? I always said that I would retire as soon as I saw a baby be born in call.
yeah,
And then last year it happened. And then I didn't. And then I didn't
you're like, I'm
retire.
not ready. I'm not ready to retire.
But if I could tell you how many sacks I see bulge out with all the fluid, and then the head starts to come, and I'm like, here we are, here we are. And
Yeah.
then it just pops, and I'm like,
Hmm.
dang. So it
Yeah.
is very rare and such a wonderful gift to see a baby be born and call, but it usually pops right
Yeah.
somewhere. If it hasn't popped in your labor, it usually pops when you're pushing. So
Yeah, and I think that's the only reason I didn't, deliver on the side of the interstate was because my water was intact. I think if my water would have broken while we were traveling, I would have dilated to 10 and had a baby.
yeah. Okay. So somewhere in between Leo and Bowen and giving birth to Gunnar, you move.
Yes, we moved November of 2020. So
Okay.
when Bowen was 6 months old.
Okay,
for my
November of
husband's job.
2020. Okay, I'm just trying to paint a picture for the audience of like, okay, now we have a history of precipitous delivery at 39 and 0. So when you're I'm gonna jump back to your miscarriage in a minute, but like when we go through Gunner's birth, are you like, okay, I'm gonna have a precipitous delivery and like, where do we live? Like, we should do this at home. Like, where was your head? I mean,
Yeah, so I knew with that, thankfully, in Lexington, there's hospitals just about everywhere. We do live just slightly outside of Lexington, but I can
okay.
get to my hospital that I delivered at in about 20 minutes with no traffic.
Okay,
Um,
perfect.
and I'm on a main road, like
Okay.
within 5 minutes of leaving my house. So,
Okay. Also, like thinking like an ambulance could get to you if you needed to. Okay.
yes, yeah.
So,
And I will say, so our family is in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we
okay.
didn't have family around it either for either births. My parents actually came up when my mom heard how dilated I was at 39 weeks. And because COVID was, a bigger thing then, she came up and worked from our house and stayed at our house. So that way, if I went into labor, they would be there because they knew I had the hour drive to the hospital as well. So
Yeah.
if we would have had to wait for a sitter for Leo, then I definitely wouldn't have made it, or my husband would have been in the car with Leo and he would have missed the birth as well.
Wow. All the things that align,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So, and this just goes to show like sometimes we make birth seem like it's so complicated, and sometimes it's just as easy as that, you
Yeah.
know? And sometimes it is really, really
Yeah.
complicated,
Yeah.
also. I want to finish Gunner's birth story and then I'm going to ask you a few questions about your miscarriage at the end of the show. And that way, if
Okay.
anyone is triggered, they could jump off if that's okay with you.
Yep.
So with Gunner, did you test positive for gestational diabetes?
No, I did not. So I had to do the early test. I did it around 12 or 13 weeks and I passed by 9 points.
Okay.
So then at 28 weeks, I told my doctor, look, I just barely passed last time. I'm going to willingly take the 3 hour test. And she was shocked because no one's apparently had someone willingly take that test.
Mm-mm, nope.
And so I willingly took it and I passed it with flying colors. So,
Okay. And so after that, then did they want you to test at home
mm,
through 34 weeks or anything like that, just to make sure you
mm,
didn't have late onset?
nope. They were just going to keep monitoring my urine and, making sure there was no sugar in my urine or anything.
Okay.
And I'm kind of a strange one where when I get high blood sugar, I get the hypoglycemic feeling. So I get like
Okay.
sweaty. So anytime I
Okay.
did have high blood sugar with Bowen, like if I accidentally ate something with more carbs than I realized, um, I would get like shaky and sweaty, and it was high blood sugar, not low. So I made
Wow.
sure to like pay attention to that, and I never had any of that with Gunner either.
Okay. So it actually sounds like it truly was a one-off with
Yes.
Bowen. Yeah.
And then they did like growth with him because I was measuring small with him actually.
Okay.
Um, my fundal measurements were about 2 weeks behind, and I never measured behind. And so just to laugh later on, at 36 weeks, they measured him at 6 pounds 9 ounces. So he was going to be
Okay.
a decent size,
Okay.
either
Yeah.
way. But that's what they measured him at 36 weeks.
Okay. So what was the plan, Alexis?
So, my husband and my two older boys were actually going to be in my brother-in-law's wedding, um, on in early May. So I was gonna only be 10 days after it was 10 days after my due date. So I decided for childcare reasons, because like I said, we don't have family down here in Lexington, and to be on top and be able to like function at this wedding, with 3 kids, because my husband was the best man. So I was going to be doing all of the things with all of the kids that
Only a
I would
third
like to
time
be
mom could
induced.
even
Yeah.
wrap their brain around that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like first
Oh
baby,
yeah.
you'd be like, "No, we can't come to the wedding, sorry." Second, you'd be like, maybe. Third, you're like, oh yeah, whatever. It's a
Yeah.
disaster anyway. We'll survive it.
Yeah, we picked our other 2 up from school on the way home from the hospital with the 3rd baby, and I was like, "That's only a third-time mom thing."
Only a
Like,
third time mom.
yeah,
Okay. So the plan was get induced.
an elective induction at 39 weeks.
Okay, you're still sticking with 39. I was wondering if you were gonna like say 38 and 4 or
Oh,
something since you
I
okay.
tried asking my doctor. I was like, Anything we can do." She's like, "You gotta give me a medical reason," and I was like, "Well, I don't have one, so
Yeah.
we'll just go right at that 39th week."
So what day were they able to fit you in that 39th week?
So he was, just 39 and 0. So
39 and
I was
0.
Yep.
Okay. You
So
made
I've been
it.
induced on a Friday, a Monday, and then this one was a Wednesday. So I've had I'm hitting all the
Yes.
days of the week to be induced.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so 39 and 0. Now, you've told us in our previous stories to get vaginal exams in advance. So,
Yes.
what were those exams telling you about Gunner's? Well, about your
So
cervix with
I
Gunner.
I had a lot of prodromal labor with him, and I was not dilated as much with him. I was 2 in like 50,
Okay.
um, from 36 weeks on, and I was GBS positive.
Okay.
So with the history of my precipitous delivery too, I wanted to be sure I could get 2 doses of antibiotics. So that was another added factor to the reason to be induced.
Okay. Sure. And I'm over here like, haha, we'll see if you get 2 doses in. you know, hope for one.
Yeah,
So when you showed up for your induction, is that where we started at 2 and 50?
I think I was 3 and
Okay.
50.
3 and
2 to 3.
50.
2, yeah,
Okay.
2 to 3 and 50 still.
Well, that's a
Um,
very different starting point. Third is the wild card. So that's a very different starting point for
yes.
you.
And I
Okay.
was not active like I was with Bowen because, like I said, with Bowen, I had to exercise to keep my sugar down. And this time around, I had a job where I was driving a lot and I was just exhausted by the end of the day and, chasing 2 other kids. I was not exercising. So,
Okay.
and I developed like bronchospasms, which I do think either I have developed asthma or I've developed an allergy to cigarette smoke. I go into a lot of homes where, for my job, and people smoke in their own homes. They can if they want to, but I would be really irritated and very short of breath um, after leaving some of these homes this pregnancy.
Okay.
So
Well, I will also tell you a couple of things. So, North Carolina is known to be one of the worst states in the country for seasonal allergies. And something is different too with those that have gotten COVID
yeah,
and then live in the South. Like we're seeing people pop up with bronchospasms, asthma, they call it reactive airway disease,
yeah.
like all different things, just kind of struggling with this more with seasonal allergies and things like that than normal. Now, Louisville, Kentucky, very different than whatever city you said in Ohio as far as
Yeah.
what blooms, what trees there are. It's a very
Oh, yeah.
green state. So that all makes a lot of sense to me.
A
Did
lot of
you
horse farms and hay and all kinds of things that I'm sure are not any good to
Yeah.
be breathing into.
No, and to do that in the middle of a pregnancy, it takes years for our body to adjust to a place like Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
Did you have COVID at any point?
I had COVID officially diagnosed one time, January of 22,
Okay.
2022, I think. And then I probably unofficially had it some more times, but um, was never tested.
Yeah, that's how I feel. I always say I've had it 3 times, but like one
I'm gonna
time I went
go
to the
with I've
doctor.
probably had it 2 at least.
Yeah. It's we're in healthcare, we're around it all the time.
Yeah.
So, okay. So we get in and I know that you were really kind of opposed to Cervidil because I love Cervidil actually. It goes in like a tampon, you can take it out, it stays for 12 hours, but it does kind of make the tissue inside the vagina, very, very, very sensitive.
Yeah.
But you were only 50% effaced. So were you still like, let's AROM Pitocin this, or were you like, let's Cook's catheter this? Like now you're in a different hospital system with a
Yeah, so
different
this
bishop.
hospital does more catheter, cook catheters, or they actually didn't use Cervidil at this hospital. They
Okay.
used they did cytotec.
Okay.
And I just personally didn't my doctors figured with my history, the doctor I had this time around, she figured with my history that thinning out really wasn't going to be much of an issue.
Okay.
So we just went ahead for Pitocin. And actually, the day before I was induced, we were at my son's t-ball game, and I was contracting about every 3 to 5 minutes, but they never got any stronger.
Okay.
And they would stop if I sat down, but start back up if I stood up. So, and that kind of continued. I was contracting every 15 minutes when I showed up for my induction. So I actually had them hold off on starting the Pitocin at first because I was like, well, maybe she can just break my water and we'll just do it that way and not even need Pitocin. But my
Yeah.
doctor still, she prefers to have at least a little bit of Pitocin on board before breaking water to make sure that the contraction pattern is good.
That makes sense. See, every provider works differently.
Yeah.
Because you can always take Pitocin away.
Yeah, and that's what she said. If you start contracting too much, we'll just stop it. So,
Yeah. Okay, so what did you decide to do then? Start
so,
Pitocin?
so we started with my first dose of penicillin,
Okay. Oh, yes,
so
that's
that way
smart.
I could.
Yes. First
And
dose of
then,
antibiotics, check.
and then they started Pitocin. That was at 6:30.
Okay.
And then I held off on starting Pitocin. They started that at 8, and I only got up to Pitocin of 6 milliunits by
Yeah.
9:30 again.
Okay.
And my doctor came by at 10:15, and I was 3 to 4 and 80. So I had thinned out quite a bit. Actually, I looked back. So I started at 360 and -2, and
Okay.
I was taking notes in labor this time because I knew I had this scheduled.
Okay.
So at 10:15 when she broke my water, I was 3 to 4, 80 and -1. So
Okay. Wow. So that was a lot of progress for a very short period of time.
in 2 hours, yeah.
Yeah.
And, then I got my second dose of penicillin right around 10:30, so they
Okay.
were able to get that second dose in.
Which
And
I'm
then
sure made you feel like, okay, I'm
yeah,
here, I'm safe, I've got my 2 doses, and like now I can give birth.
yes. And then, so at 11:15, I started kind of doubting myself, and I had gone into this birth with not wanting an epidural. I said, "I've done it before, I can do it
Mhm.
again,
Okay,
but
I
there is
was
something
so
different." Yeah.
curious. I was like, "Okay, did you like that experience and we're gonna repeat?" Okay, so you were thinking no epidural.
Yes.
Okay.
So at 11:15, I'm like, "Well, this is starting to suck." I was 690 and -1.
Okay.
And they told me, okay, they're getting ready to start a C-section at 12. So, if you want it, you need to get it now. I said, I think I'll be okay. They said, well, we can bring the nitrous in. You can try that if you want. I threw the nitrous mask eventually. It didn't work. I must be a person
Oh,
that doesn't respond to it at all. There was absolutely no change in how I felt, how anything felt, or they just didn't have it plugged in right, honestly.
who
Because it,
knows? Yeah.
yeah,
Because usually we see you kinda like drift off
yeah.
to La La Land, you know?
No, there was nothing. So at 11:15, like I said, I was 690 -1. At 12, I started saying I can't do this, and then I told myself, okay, I know when I'm saying I can't do this, I must be getting close. At 12:15, I was 890 and 0.
Yeah.
With each contraction, I would feel more and more pressure after each one. So from 12:15 to when I delivered, I probably had someone's hand like constantly in my vagina checking me because I kept saying, "There's more pressure. There's more pressure." I
Yeah.
was like, "He's gonna come." And finally, my doctor, I was not vocal at all with my second. I handled the contractions. I was very quiet. They said they didn't even know I didn't have an epidural in there. Well, this time around, I was focusing on relaxing my shoulders down, being loose, and I was making those guttural noises and grunting and biting my husband's arm apparently because I
Yeah.
was like, this really is terrible. At one point, I was on the fetal monitor. I was on a wireless one, and they lost his heart rate on the monitor, and I felt a thud. Like, I just felt something drop in my pelvis. Then, they're telling me, "Okay, we gotta roll you to check his heart rate because we can't find it with the portable monitor." And I don't know what it was about them moving that ultrasound monitor across my stomach, but it hurt. Like, it felt terrible. And as they're trying to look, my body is doing the fetal ejection reflex and he is coming out. And I'm yelling at them that he's coming. And they're like, "But you still have a cervical lip. You're still 8." I said, "I'm not 8 and he's coming."
Good
And
for you.
someone finally ran. My doctor had been sitting at the nurse's station because she happened to hear me at one point when she came up to check on me. And she's like, "I'm just going to sit right here." And so she didn't go far. And someone ran to grab her. And by the time she was in, he was crowning. And she said, "I need gloves." And she didn't get gloves. She said that's only the second time in her career she's never gotten her gloves on. But
Wow.
his head came out. I did not push one bit to get his head out. The fetal ejection reflex
Wow.
did it all. And it was the weirdest feeling ever. I don't even remember the like the ring of fire this time around though. Like, I can't say I had that feeling. I just remember me like grunting and him just coming out.
Wow. Those grunts and those guttural moans really help the pelvic floor
Yeah.
relax and
Yeah.
release.
So when his head came out, my doctor looked and she was like, "This baby's huge. We need to get him out." And so they're trying. I saw someone grab the stool and put it next to me because they were concerned it could be a shoulder dystocia.
Okay.
Um, and then someone pushed back on my side because I was kind of on my side, and someone pushed back on my leg, and I was like, "Oh, you just want me to push? Like, I can push him out, I
Yeah.
can push and we can get him out." So I just pushed, and my doctor kind of grabbed, and he came out. So
Yeah.
at 12:46.
12:46. Goodness.
So yeah, another very quick
Mhm.
labor.
I mean, I'm gonna tell you to have a home birth if you have another one,
Yeah,
Alexis.
yeah.
Oh my goodness, that is so fast. Now, you had mentioned before we started recording that one of them you remember kind of like reaching down.
That was my first when I had the epidural. I
Oh, okay.
reached down and I pulled him out. And I had asked if I could do that this time around, but when the
Mhm.
time came, there was no reaching down and pulling him out.
Yeah,
There was
there's
just
no. It's really funny. I'll have clients on their birth plan say like that they want to touch the head or feel the head when they're crowning. And then when they're crowning, I'm like, okay, give me your hand and I'll help you. And they're like, no, 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 no,
yeah,
no, no. Like,
yeah.
because you're just so focused and
hmm
frozen, on what you're doing. Okay. So now you have to tell us, how much did he weigh?
So at 39 weeks on the dot, he was 9 pounds 14 ounces.
What? That is so big. I mean, that is definitely
Yeah.
test some blood sugars at 39 and 0. I mean, that's an 11-pound baby at 41 weeks.
Uh huh. Yep.
Wow. And did you have tearing?
Nope.
No tearing. Oh my gosh, you guys. That's because you didn't push and you had the fetal
Yeah.
ejection reflex. So, like, he was stretching you like tremendously, even if you
Yeah.
didn't feel it. He
Well,
was
and I
stretching you.
swear the nurse, it felt like she was trying to hold me back, like almost holding him in there, or pushing him back when she's like telling me I'm only 8. And I'm like, well, he's coming and my body is doing this. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Alexis, you're incredible. These stories are, I mean, I feel like I'm right there with you by your side, like as they're all going down. Um, Really, really incredible. So, you guys, if you need to jump off, because it would be too triggering to hear about a unique story with a miscarriage, then go ahead and jump off. Alexis and I are only going to stay on about 2 or 3 minutes and just share a little story about a medication that I hadn't heard of that was used before. So, Alexis, just to kind of go backwards, in between Bowen and Gunner, there was another pregnancy that we had talked about, and you had miscarried in the ninth week, you said, but the sac was about 6 weeks and 3 days. And you had told me that you had gone in for a D&C. And I wanted to share with the audience kind of what happened after your DNC when you got home so that if this happens to someone else, that they would know what's normal or not normal and kind of how you got help with how you were feeling with your headache and your bleeding. So could you just share a little bit about that coming home from the DNC?
Yeah, so I had elected not to go under general anesthesia for the DNC. I had a spinal because I figured my epidural worked really well with my pregnancy that I had it with in my delivery. So I had the spinal, had the DNC. My bleeding was very, very minimal. And then the next day I noticed I had a headache. My my headache, I had done a lot of crying, obviously, having a miscarriage and having the DNC and everything. And it was done really late at night. I didn't get much sleep because I kept getting pushed back for other surgeries that were going on during the day. So when my headache wasn't getting better, I reached out and they said, oh, it could be a spinal headache because it was better when I would lay flat. When I'd sit up or stand up, I would notice it came back. So that space kind of closes that they puncture. That space kind of closes when you lay flat, and then when you're upright or sitting, it's open, allowing the fluid to kind of leak out. So that's what can cause the headache. Um, so I had that, and then I was having some really bad cramping. So they sent me back to the triage at a hospital. This was not the hospital I delivered at. This was before Gunnersburg, so I was at a different hospital. They sent me back to the triage area, and they noticed I had a lot of clots that were retained, that my body wasn't passing. And then they said, they gave me a medication called Fioricet, for the spinal headache to see if it would help. And if that did not help, then they were going to have to do a blood patch.
Okay. And Fioricet is a medication you had described that has Tylenol, caffeine,
And then a
and
controlled substance,
a
a
controlled
very,
substance.
very minor controlled substance. It's
Okay.
one of the least scheduled ones, but technically Fioricet still is considered a controlled substance.
Okay. And it's
Um,
typically prescribed for migraines.
yes.
Yeah, but it worked really well. I just had never heard of this story. And so I wanted to share it with the birth story audience. That number one, yes, a headache can be normal if it goes away with Tylenol, right?
Yeah.
From crying, from being sad, from being dehydrated, whatever that is. Okay. But that after you've had a spinal headache, it's not normal and you should reach out and ask for help by getting a medication, or like Alexis said, if that didn't work, they would go ahead and do a blood patch. What did they do to get those blood clots out of you that were pooling inside of your uterus after the DNC?
So they gave me cytotec, and then a few days went by, and I started passing pretty large clots. And then I think I was about a week after the initial DNC, or 8 days, I believe, actually. And I started passing very large clots and bleeding pretty heavily. So I had my husband take me back in, to the triage area, and just from leaving my house to getting to that triage area, I had saturated a pad. Blood was going down my legs. I was standing in a hospital lobby just covered in blood. So I go back up, get up to the labor and delivery area while my husband's trying to park the car with the two kids sleeping in it. And they like I get on the table and they pull a few clots that were just kind of like sitting in my vagina out. And then there was one that was like hanging out of my cervix, I guess. Take that. And then my bleeding slows tremendously. Um, and that was a resident, I want to say, who did that because it was a teaching hospital. So then the attending came in, my bleeding had slowed. And just with my history, because like I said, I had to get methergine after my first. I the doctor was kind of very rude, honestly, and she was like, "Well, you're not hemorrhaging. We've weighed the pads. They're not over X amount of milliliters that they were looking for." However, it was still heavy. I had like 75 mLs just in a 20-minute car ride,
That's
and
a lot.
not counting all the clots that they threw into the trash can while they were like after I got up there, and my clothes that had blood on them. So I was like, it's still a lot. Like, and I'm 8 days post DNC. This is not normal. So I pushed her. She said, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, I'd like some methergine. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think the look on her face was just like, she was shocked that I even probably one knew what methergine was. I didn't tell her that I worked in healthcare, that I had experience as a labor and delivery nurse, but I was like, I'd like methergine to
Good for
stop this
you.
because I don't want to be back here again.
Yeah. And did the methergine work?
It did. And then I had some very strange side effect where my whole body ached on the last day of methergine. So they gave me, I want to say, 4 days worth of methergine. And on that fourth day, it was like I had insane cramps, or like I just could barely even like make a fist. My whole body just, and it was like that in my legs, my hands.
Mm.
And I looked it up, and apparently that can happen with methergine. It says, under not common side effects, muscle spasms, but it eventually wore off and I was fine and my bleeding stopped. So,
Yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense to me because part of the mechanism of action is getting the uterine muscle to cramp and
yeah,
contract.
but it was
So
like my entire body
body
was cramping and
can't,
contracting. Yeah.
yeah. But somehow that makes sense to me, but
Yeah, it does.
nonetheless, not fun. So,
Yeah.
well, Alexis, thank you so much for being here. We had a chance to kind of email back and forth, you guys, and both of us are heading off to carpool now to pick up our
Yes.
bigs. And it's just been really fun to spend the afternoon with you and to hear these birth stories and the fact that, Gunnar was here with us for a little bit and you got to nurse and you're 5 weeks postpartum. I mean, really, thank you for giving me your time today. I really
Yeah, thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I listened to every single podcast while I was pregnant with Gunnar, and yours, other podcasts. I could not get enough of any birth stories. So,
Oh, it's so wonderful. And today the audience got 3. So
yeah.
that's really special. I appreciate you reaching out and scheduling and just thank you. And I hope you have a good rest
Yeah.
of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you for listening to Birth Story. My goal is you will walk away from each episode with a clear picture of how labor and delivery might go, and that you will feel empowered by the end of your pregnancy to speak up, plan and prepare for the birth you want, no matter what that looks like.